The trilogy is now complete. The third chapter in a musical series that began 50 years ago has finally arrived. My review of Paul McCartney's pandemic album, McCartney III, is coming up next on Track by Track. Hey everybody, my name's Kyle and this is Track by Track, music reviews, news, and commentary. Thanks for tuning in today, and if this is your first time here, please take a second to click subscribe so that you won't miss future reviews and more. Paul McCartney can do anything. That may be as much of a statement of talent as it is a statement of status. He's arguably the greatest living musician in the world today, with Bob Dylan being his only true peer. No other musician alive today can be credited with as much impact and influence as Paul McCartney. And the truth is, we'd probably still be able to say that even if Paul had never recorded another note after the Beatles broke up. There's pros and cons to that level of status. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Just because you're a legend doesn't mean you get a free pass. It doesn't mean every album you release is a masterpiece by default. And if anything, it could be said that these legends should be held to an even higher standard. Over the decades, Paul McCartney has pretty much done as he pleases, and perhaps the biggest example of that are his trilogy of solo albums. His truly solo albums, that is. Albums where McCartney handled everything from the writing to the performing to the production, all completely by himself. 1970's McCartney was a bold yet understated announcement of a new phase following the end of the Beatles. 10 years later, on McCartney II, Paul found himself in a much more experimental mode, creating one of the more polarizing albums in his discography. It's been 40 years since McCartney II. Let that sink in for a moment. 40 years. I mean, 2020 itself feels like it's been that long, right? But prompted by the global pandemic lockdown, Paul McCartney decided it was time to revive that DIY series and complete the trilogy with McCartney III. Recorded in rockdown, as McCartney put it, this new album would once again be a fully solo affair, with Paul playing all the instruments himself and handling production duties on his own as well. That's a pretty stark departure from his recent efforts. Along with the level of status Paul has earned has come the ability to have his pick of any of today's hottest producers and songwriters to collaborate with, and he's exercised those choices extensively. And while 2018's Egypt Station was patently a Paul McCartney album, it was also patently a product of its time, thanks to Uber producers Greg Kurstin and Ryan Tedder. I personally found the producer influences on that music to be a bit too heavy-handed. I mean, when you're working with someone like Paul McCartney, why the hell would you try to make their album sound like everyone else's? Thankfully, Paul was not trapped in rockdown with Greg Kurstin or Ryan Tedder or Mark Ronson or Butch Walker or Rick Rubin or Danger Mouse or Timbaland or any other A-list producer. For McCartney III, Paul would truly be responsible for his own sound. The result is that, left to his own devices, the former Beatle has recorded some of the most refreshingly authentic music McCartney has released in years. The album actually kicks off with its best track. In fact, Long-Tailed Winter Bird is probably one of my favorite tracks of all of 2020. This mostly instrumental jam has an incredibly irresistible groove that got me hooked within the first few seconds. I love when the percussion drops and you didn't even realize it wasn't there because the guitars had so much rhythm. I also dig how the guitars almost mimic horns at some points. Great stuff here. Next is Find My Way, which opens with a sound that briefly harkens back to Drive My Car before quickly shifting to more of a Savoy Truffle shuffle. It's a very retro-sounding track that brings to mind some of Paul's more whimsical solo efforts. I like how well-balanced the synth flourishes are here, as opposed to everything feeling like some massive production like contemporary Uber producers have done with Paul's music, like on Egypt Station. I also love the false ending and how it comes back in with a jam reminiscent of Talking Heads. Paul is clearly having fun, and the feeling is infectious. The two weakest songs on the album show up next at tracks 3 and 4. Pretty Boys and Women and Wives are both very pedestrian musically, and actually become a bit repetitive as well. On top of that, Paul's vocal on both songs truly shows his age. He sounds old here. And of course, he is 78 now, so that's to be expected to a certain extent. But I mention it specifically on these two songs because that isn't something I tend to notice so much on most of the other tracks on the album. On track 5, we meet Lavatory Lil, which, Sounds a bit salacious at first, but once you get past the peculiar nickname of this curious woman, you'll find a fun blues/rock stomper. It's the kind of song only Paul McCartney could sing this earnestly. You'll raise an eyebrow over Lavatory Lil at first, but just give in to it. Next up is Deep, Deep Feeling, a song that to a certain extent sounds like Tears for Fears auditioning to record a James Bond movie theme song. For me, this is one of the most interesting songs on the new album. I feel like Paul is exploring all kinds of unique and almost exotic textures here. I love the jolting rhythm, the layered strings, the vocal stings, and the distant echo of guitars behind the plodding piano notes. All that being said, this thing does run a bit long at nearly 8.5 minutes. There's even a false ending where it could have stopped and been just fine. I do like the song, but if Paul ever does play it live, it'll be a song where the audience either hits the restroom or blazes up. On track 7, Paul goes full-on glam rock with Slidin'. I love the fat, heavy, distorted guitar sound on this track, and you know how earlier I mentioned Paul's voice sounding older? Here he smartly layers his voice with reverb and is able to pull off just the right kind of sound for this kind of song. I also love the guitar solo here and the little echoes in the background. No doubt it's a fun track, but I still wish he'd cranked it up just a little bit further. If any song on the album begged to have the amps dialed up to 11, it's this one. As I've been listening to Kiss of Venus and a few other similar tracks on this album, I'm compelled to somehow define this type of song. One of Paul's trademarks is this sort of gentle, melodic, acoustic guitar ditty. I hate the word ditty, but I can't think of a better word. They're not ballads or rockers. Think Blackbird, for example. Anyway, Kiss of Venus is the strongest of several of those ditties on this album. Really nice melody and playing here. Could be a new Paul classic. Next on Seize the Day, Paul McCartney transforms into Queen with a guitar sound that strongly calls to mind Brian May's style, not to mention a little bit of Jeff Lynne as well, actually. I don't love this song, if I'm being honest, but I have to say that what impresses me about it is when I take a moment and think, that's all Paul. I gotta give him credit. He can really create a wall of sound on some of these songs. At the penultimate track on the album, we get another of my favorite songs. And you know, song doesn't even feel like the right word here. Deep Down is really more of a jam. It feels very freeform, almost like jazz, really. There's a lot of really cool instrumentation throughout the track, all kinds of layered sounds and vocals, all anchored by these subtle underlying organ chords. But again, what is amazing about this song is how it can sound like a jam session when it's just one person. It's actually pretty amazing. So again, hats off to Paul for pulling that off. Finally, at the end of the album, we get Winterbird When Winter Comes. As the title suggests, the song begins with a brief reprise of the album's opening melody, but then quickly shifts to, well, one final Paul McCartney acoustic guitar ditty. When Winter Comes is a solid song that finds McCartney in good voice. Once again, it's refreshing to hear this kind of song from him following the huge productions of his last few albums. Leading up to the release of this album, I wasn't sure what to expect. There were no advanced singles, which is a highly unusual move by today's standards. There wasn't even any official release of the track list, although fan sites have been slowly confirming the album's content ever since its announcement. Revisiting both McCartney and McCartney II over the past month, I suspected McCartney III was not likely to feel all that much like a direct sequel, considering how much time has passed and where Paul seems to be musically today. In finally hearing the album, I'd actually place it somewhere in the middle of its predecessors. It feels more adventurous than 1970s McCartney I, but not quite as out there as some of the music on 1980s McCartney II. Regardless of how it does or doesn't fit with this now trilogy of self-titled albums, the thing I'm most struck by is how much McCartney's still got it, so to speak. Some of you may be saying, well, of course he's still got it. But you know, he's brought in a lot of highly talented and highly priced people on his last several albums to make him sound as cutting-edge contemporary as possible. So it's hard to say how much Paul we've actually been hearing in recent years. But McCartney III is all Paul all the time, and that goes a long way toward making the album shine as brightly as it does. So I'm giving McCartney III by Paul McCartney an X rating of 8 out of 10. It's a welcome return to the sound of a musical legend acting like he's got something to prove, even when he's long since earned the right to do anything he wants. Once again, my name's Kyle, and this has been Track by Track. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Plus, check out some of these other videos below that I think you might also enjoy. And of course, be sure to subscribe, because true music fans always want new releases the day they come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.